There is a specific feeling that almost every player remembers from the launch of World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. I'm talking about this. The Howling Fjord is one of the most visually stunning and lore-rich zones in all of Warcraft. Its origins trace back to the Titans and what happened in Ulduar, through to the brutal rise of the Vrykul and their many wars, all the way to the fateful day when Arthas Menethil first stepped onto these shores to claim his dark destiny. In this video, we're going back to where it all started for so many of us. It's time to give this masterpiece its credit. This is the entire history and lore of the Howling Fjord. Before we dive into the zone's history, I want to take a moment to thank today's video sponsor, Boot.dev. If you've been looking for a way to start your journey into coding, this is the place for you. Boot.dev specializes in teaching back-end development, but they've swapped the traditional boring methods for an interactive system. Their platform turns learning Python, SQL, and Go into a role-playing game. With the paid membership, you're not just studying, you're also earning XP, leveling up, unlocking achievements, and even fighting bosses. My favorite feature is the Spellbook, a dedicated tab where you can instantly look up key concepts that you've already covered when you can't quite remember how something works. If you sign up, you'll be in the company of over 800,000 fellow learners, and with access to the Discord server, you'll have plenty of support while you're gaining the real-world XP required for those six-figure careers. You can read or watch all of the content for free, and there's a free demo for the interactive features on every course. All of this is backed by the 30-day no questions asked refund policy. You can head to boot.dev and use the code Karazhan to get 25% off your entire first year on the annual plan. Now, of course, when we think of the Howling Fjord, we instantly think about the main race that has occupied this zone, the Vrykul. And to understand the lore behind them, we need to head to one of the greatest places in all of World of Warcraft. Ulduar. Now, we know the story of the Old Gods and the Black Empire. I won't bore you with every fine detail, but the too long didn't read version is that when the Titans arrived to Order Azeroth and nurture its sleeping world soul, they found the Old Gods already there, trying to corrupt it. To combat the Old Gods, the Titans created the Titan Forged, races forged from the earth built out of metal and stone. 9 of these Titan Forged were then chosen to be the Keepers. They were gifted with some of the Pantheon's powers, and they were tasked with leading the Titan Forged armies in the war against the Black Empire. As we know, the Titans and their Titan-forged armies won that war. The strongest of the Old Gods was obliterated, and the other 3 were then imprisoned. But the part of this story that is vital to the Howling Fjord involves arguably the most terrifying Old God of them all, Yogg-Saron. After the war against the Black Empire, the Keepers continued to expand the facility of Ulduar, serving as their primary base of operations in the north. Deep within that fortress, they created the Forge of Wills, a machine that was designed to nurture the world soul's sentience, but it also had the capability to create a new generation of Titan-forged creatures. Now, during this period, there were a few different Titan-forged races created, like the Earthen, who were tasked with shaping the world's mountains and carving out the earth below. But important to the story of the Howling Fjord was the Iron Vrykul. These massive metal giants were designed to serve their leaders and protect Ulduar with their lives. These metal beings would roam the northern lands for centuries, protecting their keepers and the Titan facilities. But one day, this way of life would come crashing down as corruption and hatred began to take root from within. By operating in such close proximity to the imprisoned Yogg-Saron, one of the keepers, known as Loken, eventually succumbed to the Old God's maddening whispers. Plagued by this new despair and isolation, Loken sought comfort in Sif, the wife of his brother Thorim. This bond would then evolve into a forbidden affair, one that ended in tragedy when Loken, fueled by a desperate obsession, lashed out and murdered Sif after she tried to end their relationship. To conceal his crime, Loken then framed the Frost Giants of the Storm Peaks for the murder, triggering a brutal war that shattered the alliances of the Titan Keepers. Yogg-Saron then manipulated Loken even further, convincing him that he needed a new army to protect Ulduar from the chaos he had caused. Loken returned to the Forge of Wells to craft a fresh legion of earthen and Vrykul, but the Keeper had been tricked, and the machine had been sabotaged. Yogg-Saron had corrupted the Forge of Wells with the Curse of Flesh. This ancient affliction was designed to rot the Titan Forged from the inside out, transforming their immortal bodies of stone and metal into fragile forms of skin and bone. It wasn't just a defect for the newly created Titan Forged, it also worked retroactively. Now this meant that the Titan Forged, who had already been alive for centuries, could still contract this condition. It became a pandemic for the Titan Forged. No one was safe, including the Iron Vrykul clans of the north. Loken was now wholly consumed by the influence of the Old God. To protect all of these secrets, he then set out on a cold-blooded mission to silence the other keepers before they could uncover his crimes. Only a few escaped Loken's reach. Tyr and Arcadus managed to flee the north entirely. With his opposition now removed, Loken deactivated the corrupted Forge of Wells, banished his remaining Titan-forged servants to the freezing wastes of the Storm Peaks and beyond, and then sealed the gates of Ulduar. Loken's betrayal, the Curse of Flesh, the sealing of Ulduar. You might be wondering how these ancient events connect to a single zone on the coast of Northrend, but trust me, it's all about to come together. For years after Loken's betrayal, the Vrykul clans operated as the dominant force of the Northern Wilds, but this peace would then be disrupted by two of Loken's most powerful subordinates, the fire giants Vulcan and Ignis. These two saw the North as an opportunity to carve out their own empire, but they couldn't do that alone. So they approached the Winterskorn clan of Vrykul, one of the most aggressive clans of the era. This newly formed army then launched a brutal offensive against the Earthen. The survivors of this attack then fled to the keepers Tyr and Arcadus. Tyr was enraged by the news of the attack. He then personally took to the field, but Vulcan and Ignis had been working on a new weapon. They had crafted enchanted snares specifically designed to capture the wild proto-dragons of the northern peaks. They didn't just use these dragons for transport, they equipped them with iron plating and fiery weaponry. Even a Titan Keeper as powerful as Tyr was eventually forced to retreat in the face of such an overwhelming force. Knowing that the Earthen were on the brink of extinction, Tyr made a final, desperate plea to the 5 dragon aspects. When the aspects arrived to witness the war, and more importantly, saw their own distant kin being used as enslaved beasts, their response was immediate. The dragon aspects quickly took to the skies and defeated this northern army. Two of the dragon aspects, Ysera and Nosdormu, combined their domains over Dream and Time to cast a suffocating mist over the entire Winterskorn Vrykul army. This spell didn't kill them, but it rendered them completely unresponsive. To ensure that they could never threaten the world again, these sleeping warriors were then buried in massive tomb cities across the north, one of the largest being in the lands that we now know as the Howling Fjord. For thousands of years, the Winterskorn Vrykul had been lost beneath the earth, and it would stay that way until the greatest evil Azeroth has ever faced would awaken them. Now, it's important to remember that the Winterskorn were just one of the many Vrykul clans living in the north at this time. But most importantly to the story of the Howling Fjord is the Dragonflayer clan. They are easily the most famous Vrykul in all of the World of Warcraft. Once the aggressive Winterskorn were locked away in their slumbering chambers, the Dragonflayers were free to expand. They took over vast stretches of the northern lands, with the largest portion of their territory being the region that would one day become the Howling Fjord, all ruled by their powerful king, Ymiron. The influence of the Vrykul across the north is clearly visible in the massive settlements and cities they constructed there. The most impressive of these being Utgarde Keep, built to serve as the seat of power for the king. But like the other clans, the Dragonflayers began to lose their iron skin to the Curse of Flesh. To balance out this new physical weakness, they started to domesticate the proto-dragons. Now, there is a key difference to note here. While the Winterskorn just treated these dragons as mindless beasts of war, the Dragonflayers raised them as mounts and hunting companions. In time, these drakes became an inseparable part of their culture, giving the clan a massive advantage over their enemies. Even though the Dragonflayers weren't quite as aggressive as the Winterskorn, they still had plenty of enemies across the north. Their biggest rivals were the Jalgar, a fierce race of bear men native to the snowy wilds. A war between the Vrykul and the Jalgar raged quietly for years, but the moment the Vrykul integrated the proto-dragons into their society, the tide turned. The Dragonflayers used their aerial power to defeat the Jalgar, pushing them into the central forests of ancient Kalimdor, never to return to the north. The Vrykul's victory over the Bearmen was soon overshadowed by a much more terrifying problem within their own homes. Back home, the curse of flesh had tightened its grip, and Vrykul women began giving birth to children that were small and weak. In fact, these children were the very first humans to ever walk the surface of Azeroth. Fear and superstition quickly spread throughout the clans. Many Vrykul were disgusted, pleading with their king Ymiron to purge these infants to keep their race pure. Others, however, begged for mercy, arguing that despite their physical frailty, they were still their children. Ymiron ultimately chose the path of cruelty. He then issued a chilling decree. Every parent of one of these children was ordered to kill their own offspring. Those who refused would be taken to the fortress of Yalabron, and it would be there that they would face public execution. While many of the Vrykul were broken by the king's will and they obeyed, some parents found the strength to resist. They chose to run instead. They headed to the south, looking for a place called the Tirisfal Glades. Legends told them that Vrykul had settled here after following the Keeper Tyr many years ago. It was there, in the shadow of those woods, that these children would grow and eventually evolve into the human race we know today. As for the parents who stayed behind and were still caught with their human children, their fate was grim. A vicious warrior named Skadi made it his personal mission to hunt down anyone hiding a child. His pursuit was so relentless and his methods were so depraved that he earned the name he still carries today, Skadi the Ruthless. Despite all of this, the Dragonflayers could not kill their way out of the curse. They decided to enter a state of magical hibernation within the facilities of Yalabron, hoping that by sleeping through the ages, the curse might eventually fade. King Ymiron himself was placed in an enchanted slumber alongside his elite warriors, waiting for a future day when they would be awakened to reclaim their world. With the Winterskorn sealed in their tombs and the Dragonflayers locked in their magical slumber, a profound silence fell over the north. Even during the Great Sundering, the cataclysmic end of the War of the Ancients, the Vrykul did not wake up. They continued to sleep, even as the landmass we now know as Northrend broke away and drifted into the frozen north. It was during this era that the Howling Fjord finally took the shape we recognise today. The icy rivers carved deep paths through the cliffs, creating the iconic fjords that give the region its name. Massive wind-swept grasslands and jagged snow-capped mountains came to define the eastern edge of Northrend. Now, it is true that some small pockets of Vrykul did remain awake, some migrating as far as the Broken Isles. But they are a story for another day. What matters to us and to the story of the Howling Fjord is the figure who was about to set foot on the frozen shores of Northrend, and how his arrival would shatter the silence of the fjord forever. While the Vrykul slept, the fate of our world was being rewritten on a distant, dying planet known as Draenor. Following the Orcs' defeat in the Second War with the humans of Azeroth, the Elder Shaman Ner'zhul attempted to use stolen Azeroth artifacts to open portals and flee their dying world. But his escape was cut short. He was intercepted by the Demon Lord Kil'jaeden. Kil'jaeden tore Ner'zhul's spirit apart, and as punishment for failing the Burning Legion, the Demon Lord bound Ner'zhul's broken soul to a cursed set of plate armour and a rune blade called Frostmourne. The entity was then encased in a block of ice and hurled back onto the surface of Azeroth. These acts had just created the Lich King. The Lich King's mission was simple: weaken Azeroth for a new Legion invasion. But the entity had an ulterior motive: revenge. He tricked his jailers into allowing him to hurl Frostmourne out of the throne, casting it across the wastes of Northrend to hopefully one day be picked up by a champion, hoping that this act would eventually lead to his release. But still acting upon his original task, from his icy prison the Lich King began to build a new power, the undead Scourge. Using his vast telepathic power, the Lich King found his first great disciple in Kel'Thuzad, a high-ranking mage of the Kirin Tor. Together, they formed the Cult of the Damned, a group that worshipped the Lich King as a god. Their first strike was to release the plague of undeath across the powerful human kingdoms of the Eastern continent. This plague was a magical disease designed to kill the living and then raise them as mindless soldiers of the Scourge. With the plague now spreading across the human lands, the story brings us to one of the most famous tragedies in Warcraft history, the culling of Stratholme. After witnessing his own people turn into undead monsters, the young Prince Arthas Menethil ordered the city to be purged, and the civilians of Stratholme were wiped out. Arthas then hunted down the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis. He found him in the docks of the city where the demon taunted him, telling the prince to follow him to Northrend to meet his destiny. Blinded by vengeance, Arthas gathered his fleet and set sail for the frozen north, heading straight for the shores of the Howling Fjord. After a month-long journey across the freezing seas, Arthas and his fleet finally reached the eastern coast of Northrend. They made landfall deep within Daggercap Bay, a natural harbour tucked into the cliffs of the Howling Fjord. It was here that the prince established his base of operations, launching a desperate campaign to find the demon responsible for his kingdom's ruin, Mal'Ganis. But that hunt was a trap. The search eventually led Arthas to a hidden cavern where he found exactly what the Lich King intended him to find there, the cursed rune blade of Frostmourne. Arthas claimed the sword, trading his soul for the power to save his people. In that moment, the Prince of Lordaeron ceased to exist, and the most formidable Death Knight in Warcraft history was born. After finally slaying Mal'Ganis, Arthas would become corrupted by the Lich King. He led a relentless campaign that reduced both the human kingdom of Lordaeron and the elven realm of Quel'Thalas to ashes. He then returned to the ice of Northrend. It was there he made his way to Icecrown, where he shattered the frozen throne and placed the cursed helm of domination upon his own head. In that singular, world-shaking moment, his spirit merged with Ner'zhul's, and the new single entity of the Lich King was born. For several years following this ascension, the Lich King remained in a state of deep, death-like hibernation. It was only after 4 years of this dark meditation that the Lich King finally stirred. The silence of Northrend was broken as the Lich King awoke, ready to launch a second, overwhelming invasion of the world. And to help him win this war, he would reach out to the ancient, sleeping warriors he had found buried beneath the Howling Fjord. He ordered the Scourge to begin a full-scale sweep of Northrend, claiming the continent entirely. As his minions moved through the regions, they began the process of awakening the slumbering Vrykul. While the first to rise were those in Jotunheim within Icecrown, it wasn't long before the influence spread to the other tomb cities across the land. With his forces growing in Northrend, the Lich King launched direct attacks on the capitals of the Alliance and the Horde. In response, the Horde sent a Forsaken-led fleet to the eastern side of the Howling Fjord to establish Vengeance Landing, while their main force landed in the Borean tundra to build Warsong Hold. Meanwhile, the Alliance launched its own two-pronged invasion. One fleet left Stormwind for the tundra, while a second set sail from Menethil Harbour, bound for the Howling Fjord. Upon arriving in the fjord, the Alliance established its primary base at Valgard. But as the Horde and the Alliance began their race to reach the Lich King, they encountered an immediate problem. The invaders had come to fight the Scourge, but they were about to realise that the ancient Masters of the Fjord had finally returned to claim their territory. The task of waking the sleeping king, Ymiron, fell to his wife, Queen Angerboda. She began a dark ritual beneath the fortress of Yalabron. Although adventurers did manage to strike down the queen before the ritual was finished, the Lich King intervened personally. He claimed Ymiron, raising him into undeath to lead the Vrykul against the combined forces of the Horde and the Alliance. With King Ymiron restored to his throne, the Dragonflayers fully awoke and launched a brutal campaign to reclaim the Howling Fjord. Their primary target was the Alliance stronghold of Valgard. During the assault, many soldiers were captured and taken to Wormskull village, where they were either executed or forced into gladiatorial combat for the Vrykul's amusement. At the same time, the Winterskorn clan finally emerged from their 10,000-year-long slumber, but they were no longer the legendary conquerors who had once challenged the Keepers. Diminished by time and the curse of flesh, they were placed under King Ymiron's command. The Winterskorn clan's return was short-lived. They were systematically dismantled by the Horde forces operating out of Vengeance Landing and the Alliance soldiers from Westguard Keep. It was a shameful end for a clan so fierce that the dragon aspects once had to put them to sleep just to stop them. With the Winterskorn erased from the fjord, the war shifted to the Vrykul's seat of power, Utgarde Keep. Both the Horde and the Alliance would quickly send elite strike teams into the massive fortress, fighting their way through fire-drenched halls and frozen battlements. They eventually reached the top of the fortress, where they stood face to face with King Ymiron himself. Despite his ancient strength and undead empowerment, the king was slain beside his throne. Bringing a final, bloody end to the Vrykul threat in the Howling Fjord. While the battles against the Dragonflayers serve as the primary focal point of the Howling Fjord's history, the Forsaken were quietly orchestrating a project of their own behind the front lines. At Vengeance Landing, the Royal Apothecary Society were continuing work on their new plague, a concoction designed to be the ultimate killer against both the Scourge and the living. The latest strain of the new plague was meticulously engineered within the Undercity, and then it was shipped across the Great Sea to Vengeance Landing. However, the long journey in the freezing northern climate had caused the concoction to lose its potency. To try and fix this, the apothecaries at New Agamand in the Howling Fjord began a series of trial and error experiments. The apothecaries discovered that by adding ectoplasm harvested from the Forgotten Shore, they could stabilize the mixture while significantly increasing its power. To test the efficiency of this weapon, the Forsaken turned their gaze towards the Dragonflayer settlement nestled within the fjord known as Halgrind. When the Forsaken began deploying the new plague, the Dragonflayers had no warning. Within a short time, every Vrykul that inhabited Halgrind had been decimated. Today, the remains of that settlement stand as a silent, rotted scar on the otherwise stunning landscape of the fjord. Beyond the war with the Scourge and the Vrykul, the Howling Fjord also faced a significant pirate problem. A group known as the Northsea Freebooters, led by Jonah Sterling, arrived to plunder the region. They began looting ancient graves at Shield Hill, the sacred Vrykul burial ground. These pirates then quickly found that these Vrykul artifacts were more trouble than they were worth. At the newly built pirate outpost of Scalawag Point, reports claimed that anyone who touched these stolen relics ended up dead or missing. At the same time, they also began capturing the native Tuskar to sell as slaves. The conditions were so brutal for the Tuskar that almost none survived long enough to be saved. Eventually, the pressure from the Horde and the Alliance became too much for the Freebooters. A rival pirate named Annie Bonn decided to cut her losses and arranged for the death of Jonah Sterling, ending the Freebooters' influence in the Howling Fjord. At the same time, the Explorers League had landed on the shores of the Howling Fjord, and they were well underway with their excavation of the zone. They discovered the remains of a Titan statue on the eastern shoreline, slowly revealing the fjord's ties to the ancient world. But on the other end of the coast, they ran into trouble. Having dug into the cracks and the crags of the fjord, the explorers unearthed Saronite, a metal ore that was the solidified blood of Yogg-Saron. Corrupted by the influence of the old god, the miners were slowly driven mad, eventually forcing us to make our way into Whisper Gulch to put an end to their insanity. With the Vrykul clans defeated, the pirate threat neutralized, and the local skirmishes settled, the Alliance and the Horde were finally able to push deeper into the heart of Northrend, and their war against the Lich King would eventually lead them to the gates of Icecrown, a story we all know the conclusion to. As far for the Howling Fjord itself, the region eventually returned to a state of relative peace. Small pockets of Vrykul still roam their ancestral lands, but they no longer possess the numbers or the leadership to launch a real offensive. The pirates have reverted to being nothing more than petty thieves, and the halls of the Utgarde Keep have remained silent for over a decade. According to the Bronzebeard brothers, who surveyed Northrend nearly 10 years after the fall of the Lich King, the fjord is finally stable. The Alliance settlements are busy, but they're quiet. The Horde continues to maintain its presence at Vengeance Landing, and the Taunka camp of Winterhoof haven't seen a major skirmish in years. The fjord has once again become what it was 1,000 years ago, a beautiful, wind-swept wilderness. The history of the Howling Fjord is a series of brutal chapters. It began with the first Titan Forged warriors guarding the north, and it effectively ended with a race of undead kings being put down in their own halls. The fjord is the place where the first humans were born, and then banished in shame, only for their descendants to return thousands of years later to claim the land as their own. It isn't just a leveling path on the way to Icecrown, it is a masterclass in world building that deserves to be remembered as more than just a neighbour to the Grizzly Hills. Big shout out to all of our library members for supporting the channel, and again thank you to Boot.dev for sponsoring this video.